This week on the Steele Report.
That I can say, once again, the condition of our state is strong.
Tuesday night on Iowa PBS, we all watched the joint session of the 91st Iowa General Assembly, more commonly known as the Iowa Legislature, as Governor Kim Reynolds delivered her annual Condition of the State Address, laying out her agenda for this Iowa General Assembly. And our program begins right now.
Now from KWWL, this is the Steele Report.
And welcome to this week's edition of the Steele Report. As you can see, my guest is well-known KWWL political analyst Dr. Chris Larimer, a professor of political science at the University of Northern Iowa. Chris, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
We all watched what was happening on Tuesday night with the governor's condition of the state. I want to mention real quickly, you're going to hear a number of those what we call sound bites in the business, courtesy of Iowa PBS, and we appreciate Iowa PBS for letting us use those clips as they do such a great job of covering live events all across the state of Iowa, whether it be the state fair or the condition of the state of Iowa from Governor Reynolds. So overall thoughts about what she said?
Yeah, I think, it's interesting to think back on Governor Reynolds, her career as governor, because it wasn't that long ago, back in 2017, when she took over as governor for Governor Branstad, who left to be ambassador to China. Then she had an election in 2018, a tight one, and then one re-election in 2022 by a considerable margin. But we're now out at year 8 in terms of her condition of the state addresses. And, it's interesting to think back over that time. There was a question about how well was she going to be able to relate to the everyday concerns of Iowans, how well were Iowans going to be able to relate to her. And now she's in a position where giving her 8th condition of the state address seems to feel very comfortable in doing so, and it is a relatively strong position should she decide to run for re-election again in 2026. But I think thinking past sort of her place in history in terms of Iowa governors, just the speech itself, I think there were certainly a couple of partisan elements to it, but I think there were also several policy initiatives that she proposed that were mostly nonpartisan. And when a governor gives these condition of the state addresses, typically what they want to do is do a little bit of credit taking, talk about some of their past legislative successes from the previous session. They also don't want to overpromise. Where governors can get into trouble is if they propose sort of this litany of policy initiatives that then don't get addressed during the legislative session. And this speech was relatively straightforward. As I said, a number of policy initiatives or proposals that will probably get bipartisan support. She limited it to probably 5 or 6 major policy areas for the legislature to consider this session.
So it's really easy for her to feel confident right now. Can you believe the supermajority that they have, Republicans I'm talking about, in the House, 67 to 33 in favor of Republicans, and then now 34-15 in the Senate, with a special election coming up on January 28th to fill the seat of Iowa's new lieutenant governor from LeClaire. Supermajority, tough to overcome for Democrats. Yeah,
it is tough to overcome for Democrats, and this is year 9 of unified control for the Republican Party, and they've pushed some very big policy proposals on sort of both sides of the ledger in terms of changes with the individual income tax, in terms of where Iowa gets its revenue, and then also changes on the spending side, really focused on K through 12 education, the structure of that, the structure of funding related to that, as well as the changes that were made last year to the area education agency system.
So one of the things she went right into is the fact that she has lowered income taxes here during her term in office. Let's listen to that right now.
There really is so much to be proud of. We've reduced taxes, saving Iowans more than $24 billion over 10 years. No more tax on retirement income, no inheritance tax. And starting this month, Iowans get to keep even more of the money that they earn with a 3.8 flat tax, a far cry from 8.98% of 6 years ago.
And that was one of many, many standing ovations for Governor Kim Reynolds in the joint session on Tuesday night. She mentioned the size of government, kind of interesting, consolidation of agencies, moving of all the IT systems under one state agency in our state, and also she calls that the alignment and efficiency effort.
In just 18 months, our alignment and efficiency efforts have saved taxpayers $217 million, already surpassing our initial projection for the first 4 years.
Chris, she got another standing ovation there, and you could almost feel where she was headed next. and what she was going to talk about.
That I like to say we were doing Doge before Doge was a thing. And to build on our success, I'm launching our own state Doge to find even greater savings and efficiencies in both state and local government. Because to pass meaningful property tax reform, we also need to be lean at the local level. I've asked Emily Schmidt, General Counsel of Sukup Manufacturing, to lead this effort. The trajectory of our state is not just impressive, but inspiring. In just a few short years, we've turned our state into a national model for bold, get-it-done government, and we're not stopping. Emily, thank you for chairing this.
Doge, the Department of Government Efficiency proposed by President-elect Donald Trump. It sounds like she is taking some credit for having done that already at the state level.
Yeah, I mean, that was a big part of the legislature last year, and a big part of her policy proposals going into the condition of the state last year is the restructuring, reorganization of state government. There was the sort of the elimination of numerous agencies and reducing the size of government in terms of the number of agencies. So, and this has been something Republicans have talked about for a number of years, but they were able to push that through this last legislative session. And then on the tax cuts, you know, this is one of the big policy areas for Republicans, for Governor Reynolds. She actually pushed to have the flat tax accelerated by a year and moved down to 3.8%. That's now in effect for the next fiscal year. And, you know, I think that's going to be one of the biggest questions going forward. She has a number of policy proposals. As I said, there are some policy proposals that we'll talk about that may get bipartisan support. But I think just in terms of the individual income tax and then the size of her budget, there are a lot of questions about, you know, how is the new budget going to be financed given the drop in revenue or the potential for drop in revenue when it comes to implementing a flat tax, because there's an assumption there about what people will do when you have a flat tax. And so, you know, her budget that she released this last week calls for about $9.4 billion in spending. The Revenue Estimating Conference is saying that Iowa will have roughly $9.1 billion. And so she is actually having to tap into some of those reserves in the state budget to fill that. And then going forward, you know, where the Revenue Estimating Conference, what they have said is that, you know, there's going to be less money coming in state government, about 6% less this fiscal year and about 4 to 5% less for the following fiscal year. So I think both Democrats and Republicans are waiting to see what is going to be the long-term effect of moving to that flat tax and accelerating that move to a flat tax.
No mention, though, of property taxes. Maybe I missed that. I don't think she mentioned property tax for this session at all.
No, she didn't. And I think, you know, that stays away from an issue, allows her to stay back from an issue that is going to be relatively contentious. You know, this goes back to a discussion that's been in the Iowa legislature, really going back 10, 15 years to even when Governor Branstad pushed the commercial property tax and the rollback on that from 100% to 95 to 90% of assessed value. And there was some pushback from the Iowa League of Cities, the Iowa Association of Counties, and, you know, we're hearing the same pushback from cities about if there is a cap on property taxes or a restructuring of property taxes, there's a concern about what sort of revenue are they going to be able to have when they're doing their budgets, which they have to do earlier in the year. They have to have their budgets typically done by March, and the state government's doing this until June. So there's quite a bit of complication, I guess, left.
So, of course, education funding, always a huge topic, and she was quick to point out all the new options that Iowa families now have on where they're going to send their children to school.
Our positions of public trust mean we have the opportunity to make a difference in the lives of Iowans. And that starts with making sure every child has access to a quality education. Today, Iowa families have more options than ever before to choose a learning environment that best fits their child's needs. For 92% of families, that means enrolling their children in the public school where they live. And that's no surprise. We have great public schools and teachers, and we want to keep it that way. That's why we've invested more than $3.8 billion in our public schools last year, about 43% of our state budget. It's also why we made historic investments in our teachers, including the largest pay raise in our state's history. For families who want another option, we made that possible for every Iowan, regardless of income. This year, nearly 28,000 students are using education savings accounts. making it the third largest program in the country. For so many of these families, this has brought genuine educational freedom. In addition to this, over 43,000 public school students, 9%, took advantage of open enrollment to attend a public school outside of their home district.
And Chris, I thought that was a really interesting number there about the number of kids choosing open enrollment, not to go to a private school, but to go to a different public school. Were you surprised by those numbers at all? Or, I mean, 43% though of the budget, that's big. Yeah.
Yeah, education is the number one spending source in Iowa's budget. And, you know, I think, again, this fits with the Republican policy agenda on education, introducing the education savings accounts, talking about, you know, school choice, even if that's included when you think of open enrollment, allowing for that. And I think, you know, Republicans have talked about that reform when it comes to public education for a number of years. And like we talked about, you know, having 9 years of unified control, we've started to see some of those put into effect.
She also mentioned the rise of charter schools in Iowa. On your video right now, she made specific mention of Empowering Excellence, a charter school in Cedar Rapids, and one of their top students, Dakarian Harris, there on the left, and he stood up and took a bow there, as you can see on the screen. She said she wants to strengthen math skills, and then right away went into, I think, something we really were expecting, and that is cell phone distractions in the classroom.
What's no longer acceptable is doing nothing. That's why I'm proposing legislation that requires schools keep instructional time free from digital distractions at a minimum. Of course, there'll be common sense exceptions, like during an emergency, but the evidence is in, and it's time to act. Let's make sure the classroom is a place for learning, growth, and connection. Let's pass this bill and give students their best possible chance at success.
So that was not a big surprise to call for that. Do you allow your students to have their cell phones on at UNI in the classroom or not?
I ask that they have them off, but certainly recognize that they have them there. And then, you know, if you're teaching a statistics class or even, you know, just an elections class where they can look up data very quick, you know, relatively quickly with their phone, then we allow them to use it. But certainly we don't want it going off during class or answering calls during class.
And then something she mentioned again, which has not made it through the legislature so far, hands-free driving.
I want to address another important topic about cell phones that we need to finally resolve, and that's hands-free driving. Cell phones are a distraction in the classroom. They're deadly on the highway. With us tonight is a family who understands that nightmare all too well. 2 years ago, Roland Taylor was killed by a distracted driver. Of the 9 minutes the driver was in his car that evening, he spent 7 on his phone. I met Roland's wife, Gwen, and daughters Angie and Lisa last summer. They shared with me that they don't want another family to go through what they've been through. So they are strong advocates for hands-free driving. For the sake of all our loved ones on the road, let's finally pass legislation that requires drivers to keep their eyes on the road and away from their phones.
What do you think the chances are this time of that passing? Can you imagine having to go through a tragedy like that family did, losing their husband and dad, and because someone else was not paying attention because they were on their phone? Yeah.
Yeah, the distracted driving bill is something that, you know, received attention last session, just didn't make it through the House. But you would expect there to be movement on this again. I think both the distracted driving or the hands-free cell phone bill with regards to driving, as well as the cell phone ban in schools, or at least a cell phone ban during instructional time, as the governor put it. I think both of those are policy proposals that you can expect to see some bipartisan support this session.
Okay, we're going to take a short break here on the Steele Report, talk more about what the governor said this week, about what's going to happen in your legislative session. We'll return in a moment. And welcome back to this week's edition of the Steele Report. My guest is KWWL political analyst Dr. Chris Larimer of UNI, talking about Governor Reynolds' Condition of the State address that we watched on Tuesday night on Iowa PBS. And again, I want to thank Iowa PBS for letting us use those clips here from their live telecast on Tuesday night. So always child care is, you know, how do kids get to and from their transportation issues of going to child care? Should they all be in the same building?
Yeah.
27,000 new child care slots she claims has been created in recent years. That's going to be one of those non-partisan issues, do you think, or bipartisan?
Yeah, I think, you know, the couple of the proposals that were mentioned there with childcare, with regard to providing childcare for childcare workers, helping with providing a community trust fund essentially to increase wages for childcare workers, and then, as you said, also providing that an opportunity or an option for parents to have in that transition from preschool to childcare if the preschool doesn't go all day. I think both of those, there's the potential there for bipartisan support. You're hearing discussions of those issues among both Democratic and Republican leaders. But you know, they're interesting policy proposals because both of them are really relying on public-private partnerships. So I think that's going to be, you know, in the details in terms of how many Democrats get on board with that. But I think certainly Democrats and Republicans both want to see improvement in those areas in terms of wages for child care workers, as well as the transportation issue for children who do not go to preschool all day. How do they get to that child care? And if those partnerships can be built through those public-private relationships, I think that's something, again, you would expect to see some bipartisan support.
One of the things she mentioned, she pointed out her husband, who has been battling lung cancer, and luckily for him it is now in remission, so he was there with their daughters, and obviously she's very proud of her family. However, though, she did mention something that's a big concern, and Elizabeth Kling mentioned this in a series of reports here not too long ago. Iowa's cancer rate is on the rise.
Every case of cancer is a tragedy, and I'm concerned by the data showing that these tragedies disproportionately affect Iowans. Our state has ranked second for new cancer cases 2 years running, and we're one of just 2 states with rising rates. That's the what of this problem. The why and the how are where things get tricky. According to the Iowa Cancer Registry, we're in the top 5 states for binge drinking. We're also among the top for alcohol-related cancers, with the highest incidence in the Midwest. This month, the Surgeon General warned that alcohol is known as a carcinogen. Again, none of this is conclusive. There's a lot we still don't know, and multiple factors are likely at play. We shouldn't jump to conclusions, but we need to get to the bottom of this. Tonight, I'm announcing a new partnership between Iowa HHS and the University of Iowa to establish a dedicated team of epidemiologists to research the behavioral, genetic, and environmental factors that might be playing a role. And I'm asking the legislature to appropriate $1 million to get their work started. Iowans don't need more speculation. They need answers.
So we'll see where that goes up. Obviously, we don't want anyone going through cancer. Any kind of research that's going to be done in Iowa City will be beneficial, hopefully, yeah.
Yeah, and devoting a lot of resources to this. And again, this is an issue that I think will have 100% support in the Iowa legislature. Everybody wants to see more action here, and is you know, happy to vote, I think, probably for more funding in this area, in terms of cancer research.
So one area, though, that might be controversial, she mentioned Medicaid recipients who are receiving some benefits, and basically she said, if you are able to work, you should be working.
But starting next week, we'll have a president who understands the importance of work. So I'm proposing that Iowa apply for a federal waiver to institute work requirements for able-bodied adults on Medicaid. In other words, if you can work, you should.
So that's one that you think is probably going to have a tough time.
Well, I think of all the policy proposals she mentioned during her condition of the state address, I think this is the one that you're most likely to see a pretty sharp divide along partisan lines. You know, Democrats have expressed frustration over the years in terms of, or the last couple of years in terms of the cutback in unemployment benefits in Iowa, and now they've already said that, you know, they really want to see what the governor is talking about in terms of including or requesting that waiver for Medicaid recipients to implement those work requirements. Now, the governor doesn't necessarily need to go through the Iowa legislature to do this, so the Democrats are somewhat limited in how they're going to respond to this. But I think, you know, we've already heard them say that they're not fully supportive of this, or at least want to see what this is going to look like in terms of asking for that waiver to actually have work requirements for Medicaid recipients.
And going on from there, interestingly, she mentioned that Iowa's $2 billion, one of the biggest in the country, matter of fact, $2 billion unemployment trust fund is full. They actually have more money than they need right now. So this proposal.
That's why I'm again proposing that we reduce the unemployment insurance payments that employers make by half. This will result in nearly $1 billion in savings, which will flow through businesses of all sizes to communities across our state. Let's not wait another year. It's time to get this done.
So Iowa's had a lot of layoffs, and of course they cut the weeks of unemployment in the most recent sessions. So how do you think that's going to play?
Well, again, I think that kind of fits with our discussion about the asking for that waiver to put in Medicaid work requirements. I think, again, you're going to see a lot of pushback among Democrats on this and talking about it in terms of, the restrictions or the cutbacks that the governor and Republicans in control of the legislature have put on unemployed Iowans over the last couple of years. And so, I expect this to be a very partisan issue. Again, Democrats are limited in what they can do in terms of the governor requesting that waiver from the federal government. But on the unemployment trust fund, the changes in those wages, I think you're going to see some real pushback from Democrats.
Yeah, I have to admit, I did have to laugh when she mentioned taking a trade mission.
Of course, we're always focused on expanding Iowa's economy. That's why I led a trade mission to India, the world's largest democracy and a place that holds great potential for Iowa farmers. But not all trade missions require long-distance travel. This spring, I'm headed to a place closer but much different than here. A place where taxes are high, the education system is failing, where crime is off the charts, business regulation is crushing, and their government is running a $3.2 billion deficit. I'm heading to Illinois.
So she was talking about really is meeting with businesses in our neighboring state of Illinois, trying to convince them to come to Iowa because of all the things that are going on here. What'd you make of that one?
Well, I think, for folks who are from Illinois, they probably didn't
like that one.
Particularly appreciate that comment. But I mean, it's no secret that the state of Illinois has struggled a little bit with their budget, particularly with the pension system, and in particular just the weight that the city of Chicago carries with the state of Illinois' budget. I mean, it's such a disproportionate factor when you consider everything that's going on there, including the pension system. But yeah, I don't know that it's going to win over any folks from Illinois. I'll be curious if my brother from Chicago was watching the other night.
Or the governor of Illinois.
Yeah.
Next time they meet. Anything that she didn't say that you were expecting?
Well, I mean, she didn't mention property taxes. Mm-hmm. We heard Senate Minority Leader Janice Weiner talk about, there was not a mention of affordable housing, which, there's been a lot of reports talking about that in Iowa. So I think she kept it, relatively bipartisan for the most part on a number of issues, and it was a relatively straightforward speech. When you think about, again, back to what we talked about with what governors want to do with these speeches, there's credit claiming, and then there's avoiding over-promising on legislative proposals. And I think for the most part, Governor Reynolds stuck to that script of what a relatively good condition of the state address is going to look like, even when you've had, you're looking at year 9 of unified control for your party.
Okay, so one more break right now on the Steele Report. We'll come back and wrap things up with Chris in just a moment. And welcome back to the Steele Report. We'll wrap things up with Dr. Chris Larimer of the University of Northern Iowa, our KWWL political analyst. The budget is $9 billion being proposed. That's a big budget for the state of Iowa. That's always the hot topic, getting it through, and will there be enough revenue to support that? That's the big question, right?
Yeah, it is. It certainly is. And I think, as we talked about before the break, just, the projections from the Revenue Estimating Conference, what they've shown for the next 2 fiscal years is a drop in revenue. And that makes sense when you're talking about a flat tax being put into effect. That, they're projecting at the moment, from December at least, that revenue is going to be down about 6% for the next fiscal year. For the following fiscal year, down 4 to 5%. And so, I think everybody, both Democrats and Republicans, as we talked about at the beginning of the show, are waiting to see how that plays out, waiting to see what the March estimates from the Revenue Estimating Conference look like in terms of the size of the budget, because that individual income tax generally makes up roughly 51% of projected revenues or revenues for the state of Iowa. And when you talk about moving that to a flat tax, there's potentially a significant implication for the amount of revenues Iowa has for all the policy proposals that the governor talked about and for everything that both Democrats and Republicans want to do this session.
Yeah, you got to have the money. You got to spend it, that's for sure. Okay,
Yeah.
Chris, thanks a lot. Really appreciate that. That's it for this week on the Steele Report. A new show coming up next week. As always, thanks for watching.